Friedland from the Eagles of Empire series. Joy. First thing to say is the system changed significantly. Now, I haven't gotten to see the new system that's more streamlined, but there are things about that that frighten me. The fact that it's buckets of dice. But the rule books in this thing are a mess. And I cannot be certain that I understand the game. However, I think I do. And if I do, this is a very ultra-simplistic game with almost nothing to recommend it over, say, I don't know, I'm thinking Napoleon at Waterloo here, the old freebie that came, from SPI to tempt people, and before that was actually published, but to tempt people into wargaming. Now, the advantage of the old Napoleon at Waterloo game system, and then Napoleon's Art of War later, which I covered, is it's really, really simple. Anyone can pick it up. The rules are not. We got 16 pages here and another 16 here. Now, that thing was, I think, either 4 or 6 pages of rules. Tiny, tiny little game in terms of how it explains it. And it allows you to play out these maneuvers and get pretty reasonable sort of results at a very abstract level where things are fairly simple. This adds some complexity. There's no question. It certainly adds a lot of rules. I don't know how much they add to the game. It adds complexity in dealing with these areas, which are very counterintuitive and very difficult to manage, and component-wise cause huge problems because you've got to have your long units set up in certain ways. It becomes sort of this mishmash between a normal area control game and a minis type game. Except then all the small units don't have any real facing or anything like that. They're just this cluster of crap that's facing whichever way is most appropriate at any given time. Totally maneuverable within the situation, whatever. But anyway, the rules for handling and regulating movement, combat, they do add some things over the Napoleon at Waterloo system. They add the idea of cav opportunity charges. But the means by which they describe all of this is very verbose and very, very difficult to parse. And what it comes down to, my understanding of it is that there is a very, very simple game that could have been written much, much more easily, that they spent a lot of effort making obfuscated, essentially. I feel like this, I don't know, could have been done in very few pages, except that there are a lot of little special rules, especially regarding some of the special unit types that are going on here, and how artillery works, whether it's attached to a unit or not, and whether or not it gets left behind because of terrain. Just all kind of issues that really the design decision of not putting a hex map on opened this game up to a lot of complexity that doesn't really add anything. You end up just pushing pieces forward as far as I see. Like I said, I may be completely missing this game. If that's the case, then I vaguely understand. So the thing is, I picked this up. Well, I picked it up because it looked interesting, area movement, etc. But I decided to play it and ended up picking up the second one in the series after having a little bit of fun with this, and we'll get to that in a moment. The third one in the series. This is the second. But I was persuaded to play it because of some discussion over on Board Game Geek about how this is sort of the ultimate tactical area movement type situation, and some words were spent towards it that I still believe are interesting. I think that there's something that could be done interesting with this. I don't think the game manages it because it represents the spatial areas in a way that Well, these areas look bigger than the units, okay? Which means the unit can be positioned in a way where it presents a flank that doesn't necessarily make sense in all cases, is basically what I'm thinking. I was led to believe maybe there's a way that these areas could be built and represent the terrain that would prevent any weirdness from happening. Frankly, I think we're better off in this kind of situation with just a pure free movement situation, as some people have suggested the word should be used. Essentially, something where you're measuring your unit's distance out the same way you would in a minis game, and you're just really playing minis without the minis. And there's some disadvantages to that. The hex map gives you this big advantage of this regularized means of controlling movement distances for firing, stuff like that. This game doesn't really give you that. It gives you some weird things where some areas look like the artillery is firing further than it would in other cases. You have a lot of this abstraction going on. But that's fine. It's just, there's no clever magic that I saw in this. What it really is this sort of hybrid where you're just pushing your units forward, and I feel like I'd have a more realistic situation with that hex map, and I'd have a more realistic situation by far if there weren't areas in it, if I was just measuring it out as I would in a minis game. Okay, great. But that's where the fun kind of came in, was just pushing these units forward and throwing them into a combat, and it was kind of a little even looser feeling than a Napoleon at Waterloo type situation where you had this regulated hex board. I'm just shoving things forward and rolling one attack, and all very, well, I'm not going to say simple, because you have this summary of die roll modifiers you have to look over for the combat, and clearly this has changed. There's now buckets of dice system. But I don't know how much I gained from this and from the multiple units, multiple counters per unit indicating all these step losses. I don't feel like I'm getting all that much added to the game by all of the additional sort of mechanical complexities as well as rules complexity. I feel like I've got a really, really simplistic game that doesn't do a very good job. Still, there is this kick out of pushing the units forward and slamming them into each other. And, you know, that brief moment of about 2 hours where I was kind of enjoying this game, I did decide, hey, I better grab the fairly cheap copy of Allow that was kicking around on Board Game Geek. Because if I end up giving a good review, somebody else will probably pick it up. Well, there was my cost, you know. This is not a system I'm going to go to very often. First of all, there's a huge investment in trying to figure this crap out for what I got out of it, right? You know, I mean, I've got, in terms of play, I got something that I don't think is any better than the Napoleon at Waterloo system. In terms of additional rules, cav charges, counter charges, the effects of different units, etc., I don't feel like they add too much in terms of actual realism. The cav counter charges, hey, they almost feel like they capture the concept, because cav should be able to kind of interdict infantry movement. But then when I start playing it out and seeing, oh geez, a stack of cav hits one of those big infantry formations in motion, it can be good. It can be good, because there are bonuses for the cav. Cav countercharge? Nah. That just gets brushed aside by a big stack of cav. They don't even slow you down. And it doesn't take a lot of modifier to get to the point where... So the attacker has to be significantly better than the defender, which means a cav countercharge, you have to have almost an overwhelming superiority in a single stack of cav. A cav group. It could be several stacks in one little area, several divisions, whatever. But a cav group has to significantly outnumber whatever it's interdicting to have any good effect at all. You need to get a die roll that puts you... Hey, to get even, you have to roll between a 7 and 11. Okay, that means you have to have a bonus of 3 to 4 points. To get a good effect, you need to get above a 12 or above a 17 to be immune to damage. You really have to outnumber the opponent. And normally, if a cav stack is doing anything significant to attack an enemy, right? If it's got a charge going because an infantry's moved, that cav stack better be pretty big or it's not going to take the infantry out. It's tough to figure out how you're going to ever see a big cav battle develop in this game. What you end up seeing is somebody gets an initiative where they can move a unit that's big enough to do some damage, and then they do it. And the other guy is left kind of sitting there saying, oops, there goes my unit. You could certainly cluster a bunch of your cav as the Russians in this scenario. They start clustered and leave them there, and they're kind of a guardian. Okay, but what do they protect against? Well, they protect against an infantry unit moving up to them if they make their morale checks and can charge. And they protect against a cav unit attacking in that area. But it doesn't feel right. It feels like the Russians have much more cav that can be tied down by one little French cav just positioning itself off to the corner. And then those Russian cav either sit there or they start trickling away and they're no longer effective, right? Anyway, I just did not feel like this represented anything particularly instructive about Napoleonic warfare. And from what I understand, the same system has been basically lifted for American Civil War, which to me is pure bullshit. You can't do that. American Civil War is about infantry units grinding up against each other and nothing else. Cav is just there for scouting. Now, I may be mistaken. That I've gotten from someone else. I am fairly certain, when I say, geez, I could be completely missing the point of the game, I am fairly certain there is not much more here. But, you know, the amount of people, by that I mean, you know, more than one, who seem to just be enthralled by this system and seem to be claiming, oh yeah, it's so realistic. I'm left with the feeling of, well, I'm either totally missing something or they're just talking out their ass and have never played something like, NBS 3.0, the Napoleonic Brigade series, or Ney versus Wellington, or else they just can't handle them. And they're thinking, oh, well, yeah, but this is so much more realistic than a Columbia block. Yeah, okay. We don't want to talk about that, right? You don't tell people and apparently the same discussion goes on Consim World, you don't tell people on a war game side of the board, oh, this is so realistic, when it's not. And that's really my feeling here. Of course, again, maybe I've just completely not been able to understand why there are so many pages of rules in here. Maybe there's a whole lot more hidden between those words that I can't see. But it doesn't seem to be the case. It just seems like they've gone through extreme amounts of detail to cover stuff that most games abstract away. And then gotten wrong those things which really make Napoleonic warfare different from other eras. Anyway, that's my feeling on it. I'm pretty damn disappointed overall, although I did get a kick out of, I don't know, somewhat maybe just torturing myself, slamming things together and not really caring. I don't know. On to something better.